Good evening and welcome back to my channel. I'm your loyal Hufflepuff, and today we will start our reading in Book 2 of Shadow and Bone. This one's titled Siege and Storm. This is the second book of the trilogy, Shadow and Bone, and there's an upcoming season of Shadow and Bone that will be based off of this book. I'm looking forward to finishing the series. I'm in the middle of watching the series, and I've noticed some things already, and I know that the first season is also based off Six of Crows, the first book of Six of Crows. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start reading in Siege and Storm. Okay. The boy and the girl had once dreamed of ships long ago, before they'd ever seen the true sea. They were the vessels of stories, magic ships with masts hewn with sweet cedar and sails spun by maidens from thread of pure gold. Their crews were white mice who sang songs and scrubbed the decks with their pink sails. The Verrader was not a magic ship. It was a Kerch trader, its holding bursting with millet and molasses, its stink of unwashed bodies and the raw onions of sailors. The raw onions the sailors claimed would prevent scurvy. Its crew spat and swore, gambled for rum rations. The boy, and the girl were given spilled weevils, and their cabin was a cramped closet they were forced to share with two other passengers in a barrel of salt cod. They don't mind. They grew used to the clang of bells sounding the hour, and the cry of the gulls, the unintelligible gabble of Kerch. The ship was their kingdom, and the sea a vast moat that kept their enemies at bay. The boy took to life aboard a ship as easily as he took to everything else. He learned to tie knots and mend sails, and as his wounds healed, he worked the lines beside the crew. He abandoned his shoes and climbed barefoot and fearless in the rigging. The sailors marveled at the way he spotted dolphins, schools of rays, bright striped tigerfish, the way he sensed the place a whale would breach the moment before its broad pebbled back broke the waves. They claimed they'd be rich if they just had a bit of his luck. The girl made them nervous. 3 days out to sea, the captain asked her to remain below decks as much as possible. He blamed it on the crew's superstition, claimed that they thought women aboard ship would bring ill winds. This was true, but the sailors might have welcomed a laughing, happy girl, a girl who told jokes or tried her hand at the tin whistle. This girl stood quiet and unmoving by the rail, clutching her scarf around her neck, frozen like a figurehead carved from white wood. This girl screamed in her sleep and woke the men dozing in the foretop. So the girl spent her days haunting the dark belly of the ship. She counted barrels of molasses, studied the captain's charts. At night, she slipped into the shelter of the boy's arms as they stood together on deck, picking out constellations from the vast spill of stars. The hunter, the scholar, the three foolish suns, the bright spokes of the spinning wheel, the southern palace with its 6 crooked spires. She kept him there as long as she could, telling stories, asking questions, because she knew when she slept, she would dream. Sometimes she dreamed of broken skiffs with black sails and decks slick with blood, of people crying out in the darkness, but worse were the dreams of a pale prince who pressed his lips to her neck, who placed his hands on the collar that circled her throat and called forth her power in a blaze of bright sunlight. When she dreamed of him, she woke shaking, the echo of her power still vibrating through her, the feeling of the light still warm on her skin. The boy held her tighter. The boy held her tighter, murmured soft words to lull her to sleep. It's only a nightmare, he whispered. The dreams will stop. He didn't understand. The dreams were the only place it was safe to use her power now, and she longed for them. On the day the Verhader made land, the boy and girl stood at the rail together, watching as the coast of Novi Zem drew closer. They drifted into harbor through an orchard of weathered masts and bound sails. There were sleek sloops, and little junks from rocky coasts of the Shuhan, armed warships and pleasure schooners, fat merchantmen and Ferdan whalers, and bloated prison galley bound for the southern colonies flew the red-tipped banner that warned there were murderers aboard. As they floated by, the girl would have sworn she heard the clink of chains. The Verhader, sorry, the Verhader found its birth. The gangway was lowered. The dock workers and crew shouted their greetings, tied off ropes, prepared the cargo. The boy and the girl scanned the docks, searching the crowd for a flash of Heartrender crimson, or Summoner blue, for the glint of sunlight off Ravkan guns. It was time. The boy slid his hand into hers. His palm was rough and calloused from the days he'd spent working the lines. When their feet hit the planks of quay, the ground seemed to buck and roll beneath them. The sailors laughed. Varwell, Ventomen, they cried. The boy and the girl walked forward and took their first rolling steps in the new world. Please, the girl prayed silently to any saints who might be listening. Let us be safe here. Let us be home. That was the end of what's called Before. And now we get to start chapter 1. 2 weeks we'd been in Kofton, and I was getting lost. The town lay inland, west of the Novi Zem coast, miles from the harbor where he'd landed. Soon we would go farther, deep into the wilds of the Zemeni frontier. Maybe then we'd begin to feel safe. I checked the little excuse me. I checked the little map I'd drawn for myself and retraced my steps. Maul and I met every day after work to walk back to the boarding house together. But today I'd gotten completely turned around when I detoured to buy our dinner. The calf and collared pies were stuffed into my satchel and giving off a very peculiar smell. The shopkeeper had claimed they were a Zemeni delicacy, but I had my doubts. It didn't much matter. Everything tasted like ashes to me lately. Maul and I had come to Kofton to find work that would finance our trip west. It was the center of the Jurda trades, surrounded by fields of the little orange flowers that people chewed by the bushel. The stimulant was considered a luxury in Ravka, but some of the sailors aboard the Verhader had used it to stay awake on long watches. Zemeni men like to tuck the dried blooms between lip and gum, and even the women carried them in embroidered pouches that dangled from their wrists. Each store window I passed advertised different brands. Bright leaf shade, Doka, the burly. I saw a beautifully dressed girl in petticoats lean over and spit a stream of rust-colored juice right into one of the brass spittoons that sat outside every shop door. I stifled a gag. That was one Zemeni custom I didn't think I could get used to. With a sigh of relief, I turned onto the city's main thoroughfare. At least now I knew where I was. Cofton still didn't feel quite real to me. There was something raw and unfinished about it. Most of the streets were unpaved, and I always felt like the flat roofed buildings with their flimsy wooden walls might tip over at any minute. And yet they all had glass windows. The women dressed in velvet and lace. The shop displays of overflowed with sweets and baubles, and all manner of finery instead of rifles, knives, and tin cookpots. Here, even the beggars wore shoes. This was what a country looked like when it wasn't under siege. As I passed a gin shop, I caught a flash of crimson out of the corner of my eye. Corporalki. Instantly I drew back, pressing myself into the shadowy space between two buildings, heart hammering, my hand already reaching for the pistol at my hip. Dagger first, I reminded myself, sliding the blade from my sleeve. Try not to draw attention. Pistol if you must, power as a last resort. Not for the first time, I missed the fabricator-made gloves that I'd had to leave behind in Ravka. They'd been lined with mirrors that gave me an easy way to blind opponents in a hand-to-hand fight, and a nice alternative to slicing someone in half with the cut. But if I'd been spotted by a Corporal Nick Heartrender, I might not have a choice in the matter. They were the Darkling's favored soldiers and could stop my heart or crush my lungs without ever landing a blow. I waited, my grip slippery on the dagger's handle, then finally dared to peek around the wall. I saw a cart piled high with barrels. The driver had stopped to talk to a woman whose daughter danced impatiently beside her, fluttering and twirling in her dark red skirt. Just a little girl, not a Corporalnik in sight. I sank back against the building and took a deep breath, trying to calm down. It won't always be like this, I told myself. The longer you're free, the easier it will get. One day, I would wake from a sleep free of nightmares, walk down a street unafraid. Until then, I kept my flimsy dagger close and wished for the sure heft of Grisha steel in my palm. I pushed my way back into the bustling streets and clutched at the scarf around my neck, drawing it tighter. It had become a nervous habit. Beneath it lay Morozova's collar, the most powerful amplifier ever known, as well as the only way of identifying me. Without it, I was just another dirty, underfed Ravkan refugee. I wasn't sure what I would do when the weather turned. I couldn't very well walk around in scarves and high-necked coats when summer came. But by then, hopefully Maul and I would be far from crowded towns and unwanted questions. We'd be on our own for the first time since we'd fled Ravka. The thoughts and a nervous flutter through me. I crossed the street, dodging wagons and horses, still scanning the crowd, sure that at any moment I would see a troop of Grisha or Oprichniki descending on me. Or maybe it would be Shuhan mercenaries, or Fredan assassins, or the soldiers of the Ravkan king, or even the Darkling himself. So many people might be hunting us. Hunting me, I amended. If it weren't for me, Maul would still be a tracker in the First Army, not a deserter running for his life. A memory rose unbidden in my mind. Black hair, slate eyes, the Darkling's face exultant in victory as he unleashed the power of the Fold before it snatched that victory away. News was easy to come by in Novi Zem, but none of it was good. Rumors had surfaced that the Darkling had somehow survived the battle on the Fold. that he had gone to ground to gather his forces before making another attempt on the Ravkan throne. I didn't want to believe it was possible, but I knew better than to underestimate him. The other stories were just as disturbing, that the fold had begun to overflow its shores, driving refugees east and west, that a cult had risen up around a saint who could summon the sun. It didn't I didn't want to think about it. Maul and I had a new life now. We'd left Rovka behind. I hurried my steps, and soon I was in the square where Maul and I met every evening. I spotted him leaning against the lip of a fountain, talking with a Z- Zemini friend he'd met working at the warehouse. I couldn't remember his name. Jep, maybe? Jeff? Fed my four huge spigots. The fountain was less decorative than useful. A large basin where girls and house servants came to wash clothes. None of the washerwomen were paying much attention to the laundry, though. They were all gawking at Maul. It was hard not to. His hair had grown out of its short military cut, and it was starting to curl at the nape of his neck. The spray from the fountain had left his shirt damp, and it clung to skin bronzed by long days at sea. He threw his head back, laughing at something his friend had said, seemingly oblivious to the sly smile stoned his way. He's probably so used to it, he doesn't even notice me anymore. He doesn't even notice anymore, I thought irritably. When he caught sight of me, his face broke into a grin and he waved. The washerwomen turned to look and then exchanged glances of disbelief. I knew what they saw. A scrawny girl with stringy, dull brown hair and sallow cheeks. Fingers stained orange from packing Jurda. I'd never been much to look at, and weeks of not using my power had taken their toll. I wasn't eating or sleeping well. The night and the night and the nightmares didn't help. The women's faces all said the same thing. What was a boy like Maul doing with a girl like me? I straightened my spine and I tried to ignore them as Maul threw his arm around me and drew me close. Where were you? He asked. I was getting worried. I was waylaid by a gang of angry bears, I murmured into his shoulder. You got lost again? I don't know where you get these ideas. You remember Jez, right? He said, nodding to his friend. How do you go? Jess asked, in broken Ravkan, offering me his hand. His expression seemed unduly grave. Very well, thank you. I replied in Zemeni. He didn't return my smile, but gently patted my head. Jess was definitely an odd one. He chatted a short while longer, but I knew Maul could see I was getting anxious. I didn't like to be out in the open for too long. We said our goodbyes, and before Jess left, he shot me another grim look and leaned in to whisper something to Maul. What did he say? I asked as we watched him stroll away across the square. Oh, nothing. Did you know you have pollen in your brows? He reached out to gently brush it away. Maybe I wanted it there. My mistake. As we pushed off from the fountain, one of the washerwomen leaned forward, practically spilling out of her dress. If you ever get tired of skin and bones, she called to Maul, I've got something to tempt you. I stiffened. Maul glanced over his shoulder. Slowly, he looked up. He looked her up and down. No, he said flatly, you don't. The girl's face flushed an ugly red as the others jeered and cackled, splashing her with water. I tried a haughtily arched brow, but it was hard to restrain the goofy grin pulling at the corners of my mouth. Thanks, I mumbled as we crossed the square, heading toward our boarding house. For what? I rolled my eyes. for defending my honor, you dullard. He yanked me beneath a shadowed awning. I had a moment's panic when I thought he'd spotted trouble, but then his arms were around me and his lips were pressed to mine. When he finally drew back, my cheeks were warm and my legs had gone wobbly. Just to be clear, he said, I'm not really interested in defending your honor. Understood, I managed, hoping I didn't sound too ridiculously breathless. Excuse me. Besides, he said, I need to steal every minute I can before we're back at the pit. The pit was what Maul called our boarding house. It was crowded and filthy and afforded us no privacy at all. But it was cheap. He grinned, cocky as ever, and pulled me back into the flow of the people on the street. Despite my exhaustion, my steps felt decidedly lighter. I still wasn't used to the idea of us together. Another flutter passed through me. On the frontier, there would be no curious boarders or unwanted interruptions. My pulse gave a little jump, whether from nerves or excitement, I wasn't sure. So, what did Jez say? What did Jez say? I asked again, when my brain felt a bit less scrambled. He said I should take good care of you. That's all? Maul cleared his throat, and he said he would pray to the god of work to heal your affliction. For what? My what? I may have told him that you have a goiter. I stumbled. I beg your pardon? Well, I had to explain why you were always clinging to that scarf. I dropped my hand. I've been doing it again without even realizing. So you told him I had a goiter? I whispered incredulously. I had to say something, and it makes you quite a tragic figure. Pretty girl, giant growth, you know. I punched him hard in the arm. Ow! Hey, in some countries, goiters are considered very fashionable. Do they like eunuchs too? Because I can arrange that. So bloodthirsty. My goiter makes me cranky. Maul laughed, but I noticed that he kept his hand on his pistol. The pit was located in one of the less savory parts of Kofton, and we were carrying a lot of coin, the wages we'd saved for the start of our new life. Just a few more days, and we'd have enough to leave Kofton behind. The noise, the pollen, filled air, the constant fear. We'd be safe in a place where nobody cared what happened to Ravka, where Grisha were scarce, and no one had ever heard of a sun summoner. And no one has any use for one. The thought soured my mood, but it had come to me more and more lately. What was I good for in this strange country? Maul could hunt, track, handle a gun. The only thing I'd ever been good at was being a Grisha. I missed summoning light, and each day I didn't use my power, I grew more weak and sickly. Just walking beside Maul left me winded, and I struggled beneath the weight of my satchel. I was so frail and clumsy that I barely managed to keep my job packing Jurda at one of the field houses. It brought in mere pennies, but I had insisted on working, on trying to help. I felt like I had when we were kids, capable Maul and useless Alina. I pushed the thought away. I might not be the sun summoner anymore, but I wasn't that sad little girl either. I find a way to be useful. Let's see here. Very good. The sight of our boarding house didn't exactly lift my spirits. It was 2 stories high and in desperate need of a fresh coat of paint. The sign in the window advertised hot baths and tick-free beds in 5 different languages. Having sampled the bathtub and the bed, I knew the sign lied no matter how you translated it. Still, with Maul beside me, it didn't seem so bad. We climbed the steps of the sagging porch and entered the tavern that took up most of the lower floor of the house. It was cool and quiet after the dusty clamor of the street. At this hour, there were usually a few workers at the pock-marked tables, drinking off their day's wages. But today it was empty, save for the surly-looking landlord standing behind the bar. He was a Kirch immigrant, and I'd gotten the distinct feeling he didn't like Ravkans. Or maybe he just thought we were thieves. We'd shown up 2 weeks ago, ragged and grubby, with no baggage and no way to pay for lodging except for a single golden hairpin that he probably thought we'd stolen. But that hadn't stopped him from snapping it up in exchange for a narrow bed in a room that we shared with 6 other boarders. As we approached the bar, he slapped the room key on the counter and shoved it across to us without being asked. It was tied to It was tied to a carved piece of chicken bone, another charming touch. In the stilted Kirch, he picked up aboard the hater. Maul requested a pitcher of hot water for washing. Extra, the landlord grunted. He was a heavy-set man with thinning hair and the orange-stained teeth that came from chewing Jurda. He was sweating, I noticed. Though the day wasn't particularly warm, beads of perspiration had broken but over his upper lip. I glanced back at him as we headed over the staircase on the other side of the deserted tavern. He was still watching us, his arms crossed over his chest, his beady eyes narrowed. There's something about his expression that set my nerves jingling. I hesitated at the base of the steps. "The guy really doesn't like us," I said. Maul was already headed up the stairs. "No, but he likes our money just fine, and we'll be out of here in a few days." I shook off my nervousness. I'd been jumpy all afternoon. "Fine," I grumbled as I followed after Maul. "But just so I'm prepared, how do you say..." Let's see here. How do you say "you're an idiot" in Kirch? "Jerven Azel." "Really?" Maul laughed. "The first thing sailors teach you is how to swear." The second story of the boarding house was in considerably worse shape than the public rooms below. The carpet was faded and threadbare, and the dim hallway stank of cabbage and tobacco. The doors to the private rooms were all closed, and not a sound came from behind them as we passed. The quiet was eerie. Maybe someone was out for the day. The only light came from a single grimy window at the end of the hall. As Maul fumbled with the key, I looked down through the smudged glass to the charts and carriages rumbling by below. Across the street, a man stood beneath a balcony, peering up at the boarding house. He pulled up at his collar and his sleeves, as if his clothes were new and didn't quite fit right. His eyes met mine through the window, then darted quickly away. I felt Excuse me. I felt a sudden pang of I felt a sudden pang of fear. Maul, I whispered, reaching out to him. But it was too late. The door flew open. No, I shouted. I threw open my hands, and light burst through the hallway in a blinding cascade. Then rough hands seized me, yanking my arms behind my back. I was dragged inside the room, kicking and thrashing. Easy now, said a cool voice. said a cool voice from somewhere in the corner. I hate to have to cut your friend so soon. Time seemed slow. I saw the shabby, low-ceilinged room, the cracked wash basin sitting on the battered table, dust motes swirling in a slender beam of sunlight, and bright edge of the blade pressed to Maul's throat. The man holding him wore a familiar sneer. Ivan! There were others, men and women. All wore the fitted coats and breeches of Zemeni, merchants and laborers, but I recognized some of their faces from my time with the Second Army. They were Grisha. Behind them, shrouded in shadow, lounging in a rickety chair as if it were a throne, was the Darkling. For a moment, everything in the room was silent and still. I could hear Maul's breathing, the shuffle of feet. I heard a man calling a hello down on the street. I couldn't seem to stop staring at the Darkling's hands, his long white fingers resting casually on the arms of the chair. I had the foolish thought that I'd never seen him in ordinary clothes. The reality crashed in on me. This was how it ended? Without a fight? Without so much as a shot fired or a voice raised? A sob of pure rage and frustration tore free from my chest. Take her pistol and search her for other weapons, the Darkling said softly. I felt the comforting weight of my firearm lifted from my hip, the dagger pulled from its sheath at my wrist. I'm going to tell them to let you go, he said when they were done, with the knowledge that if you so much as raise your hands, Ivan will end the tracker. Show me that you understand. I gave a single stiff nod. I raised a finger, and the men holding me let go. I stumbled forward and then stood frozen at the center of the room, my hands balled into fists. I could cut the Darkling in two with my power. I could crack his whole Saints Forsaken building right down the middle, but not before Ivan opened Maul's throat. How did you find us? I rasped. You leave a very expensive trail, he said, and lazily tossed something onto the table. It landed with a plink beside the wash basin. I recognized one of the golden pins Genya had woven into my hair so many weeks ago. We'd used them to pay for passage across the true sea. The wagon to Koftin, our miserable, not quite tick-free bed. The Darkling rose, and a strange trepidation crackled through the room. It was as if every Grisha had taken a breath and was holding it, waiting. I could feel the fear coming off of them, and that sent a spike of alarm through me. The Darkling's underlings had always treated him with awe and respect, but this was something new. Even Ivan looked a little ill. The Darkling stepped into the light, and I saw a faint tracery of scars over his face. They'd been healed by a corporal nick, but they were still visible. So the Volcra had left their mark. Good, I thought with pretty satisfaction. It was small comfort, but at least he wasn't quite as perfect as he had been. He paused, studying me. How are you finding life in hiding, Alina? You don't look well. Neither do you, I said. It wasn't just the scars. He wore his weariness like an elegant cloak, but it was still there. Faint smudges showed beneath his eyes, and the hollows of his sharp cheekbones cut a little deeper. A small price to pay, he said, his lips quirking in a half smile. A chill snaked up my spine. For what? He reached out, and it took everything in me not to flinch backward. But all he did was take hold of one end of my scarf. He tugged gently, and the rough wool slipped free, gliding over my neck and fluttering to the ground. Back to pretending to be less than you are, I see. The sham doesn't suit you. A twinge of unease passed through me. Hadn't I had a similar thought just minutes ago? Thanks for your concern, I muttered. He let his fingers trail over the collar. It's mine as much as yours, Alina. I batted his hand away, and an anxious rustle rose from the Grisha. Then you shouldn't have put it around my neck, I snapped. What do you want? Of course, I already knew. He wanted everything. Ravka, the world, the power of the fold. His answer didn't matter. I just needed to keep him talking. I'd known this moment might come, and I'd prepared for it. I wasn't going to let him take me again. I glanced at Maul, hoping he understood what I intended. I want to thank you, the Darkling said. Now, that I hadn't expected. Thank me. For the gift you gave me. My eyes flicked to the scars on his pale cheek. No, he said with a small smile. Not these. But they do make a good reminder. Of what? I asked, curious despite myself. His gaze was gray flint. That all men can be made fools. No, Alina, the gift you've given me is so much greater. He turned away. I darted another glance at Maul. Unlike you, the Darkling said, I understand gratitude, and I wish to express it. He raised his hands. Darkness tumbled through the room. Now? Now, I shouted. Maul drove his elbow into Ivan's side. At the same moment, I threw up my hands and light blazed out, blinding the men around us. I focused my power, honing it to a skith of pure light. I had only one goal. I wasn't going to leave the Darkling standing. I peered into the seething blackness, trying to find my target. But something was wrong. I'd seen the Darkling use his power countless times before. This was different. The shadows whirled and skittered around the circle of my light, spinning faster. A writhing cloud that clicked and whirred like a fog of hungry insects. I pushed against them with my power, but they twisted and wrinkled, drawing ever nearer. Maul was beside me. Somehow he'd gotten hold of Ivan's knife. Stay close, I said. Better to take my chances and open a hole in the floor than to just stand there doing nothing. I concentrated and felt the power of the cut vibrate through me. I raised my arm, and something stepped out of the darkness. It's a trick, I thought as the thing came toward us. It has to be some kind of illusion. It was a creature wrought from shadow, its face blank and devoid of features. Its body seemed to tremble and blur, then form again. Arms, legs, long hands ending in the dim suggestion of claws. A broad where was I at? A broad back crested by wings that roiled and shifted as they unfurled like a black stain. It was almost like a Volcra, but its shape was more human, and it did not fear the light. It did not fear me. It's a trick, my panicked mind insisted. It isn't possible. It was a violation of everything I knew about Grisha power. We couldn't make matter. We couldn't create life. But the creature was coming toward us, and the Darkling's Grisha were cringing up against the walls in very real terror. This was what had so frightened them. I pushed down my horror and refocused my power. I swung my arm, bringing it down in a shining, unforgiving arc. The light sliced through the creature. For a moment, I thought it might just keep coming. Then it waved, glowing like a cloud lit by lightning, and blew apart into nothing. I had time for the barest surge of relief before the Darkling lifted his hand and another monster took its place, followed by another and another. This is the gift you gave me, said the Darkling. The gift I earned on the fold. His face was alive with power and a kind of terrible joy, but I could see strain there too. Whatever he was doing, it was costing him. Maul and I backed toward the door as the creature stalked closer. Suddenly, one of them shot forward with astonishing speed. Maul slashed out with his knife. The thing paused, wavered slightly, then grabbed hold of him and tossed him aside like a child's doll. This was no illusion. Maul! I cried. I lashed out with the cut, and the creature burned away to nothing. But the next creature was on me in seconds. It seized me, and revulsion shuddered through my body. Its grip was like 1,000 crawling insects swarming over my arms. It lifted me off my feet, and I saw how very wrong I'd been. It did have a mouth, a yawning, twisting hole that spread open to reveal row upon row of teeth. I felt them all as the thing bit deeply into my shoulder. The pain was like nothing I'd ever known. It echoed inside me, multiplying on itself, cracking me open and scraping at the bone. From a distance, I heard Maul call my name. I heard myself scream. The creature released me. I dropped to the floor in a limp heap. I was on my back, the pain still reverberating through me in endless waves. I could see the water-stained ceiling, the shadow creature looming high above. Maul's pale face as he knelt beside me. I saw his lips form the shape of my name, but I couldn't hear him. I was already slipping away. The last thing I heard was the Darkling's voice, so clear, like he was lying right next to me. His lips pressed against my ear, whispering so that only I could hear. Thank you. That was the end of chapter 1. I do apologize for all the coughing I made in the video. I caught a cold a few weeks ago, and I am in the process of recovering from it. And now my voice comes back here and there sometimes. But it's not the best right now. But I hope you all still enjoyed this video, as this will be the first part of our book as we go through this. I hope that you all did enjoy me reading it. If you liked it so much, please like and subscribe to my channel for more content. And if you would like to make a comment down below about the book, what your thoughts are so far, and what your thoughts are on the series of Shadow and Bone. I hope you have a good evening. I'm the Loyal Hufflepuff, and we'll see you all in the next video.